Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Biopsych and Paper 2 clinic with Tutor to You. I'm Laura. We've got Laura and we've got Rosie / Casper the Ghost at the corner there. Looking very light there, Rosie. We've got a double session tonight, so stay tuned right up until the end, 7 o'clock. We'll leave you with some tips, so stay right until the end, and we're going to get going straight away to maximise our time. So we're going to get going with some biopsych. We'll pause in the middle just for a second and make the transition into our paper 2 clinic, where we'll answer all your questions. We can see loads of questions coming through the chat already. I can see loads of people saying help. That's what we're here for. Okay, so we're going to get straight on. Who's kicking us off tonight?
I'm going first, Laura.
All right then, Laura. So let's go straight into biopsychology. Answers in the chat, everybody. Let's go.
Okay, guys, so the first lot of games is the 10-second countdown. So the first question that you've got 10 seconds to answer this. Put your answers in the chat box. Is name the different brain waves we experience during sleep, and also what stage they occur in.
Liftoff will start in T-minus 10 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have ignition.
Okay, so we definitely got a bit of a mixture. So Zoe McCartney saying stage 1 alpha, theta, stage 2 delta. Yeah, roughly speaking, that is the correct order. And I see a few others of you have also put that down as well. Some of us have not quite got the right order, have put REM first. So let's just reveal the answer for this one. Stage 1 and 2, we've got alpha waves that then progress to theta. Stage 3 and 4 is delta, and stage 5 is obviously the REM, sleep rapid eye movement, which actually resembles that of an awake person. In other words, the waves are very similar to alpha waves, basically. All right, second question then. We've got identify the difference between, I've already seen some questions in the chat box about these, the difference between endogenous pacemakers and exogenous zeitgebers.
Liftoff will start in T-minus 10 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have ignition.
Yeah, some really good answers coming through here. Sophie Malone said endogenous is internal, like the SCN, yes, superchiasmatic nucleus. Well, you can give me an example of exogenous zeitgeber then. Just seeing what. Okay, Francesca, we've got external things like light. Yeah, well done. Excellent. Let's reveal the answer. So we've got endogenous are within the body, such as the SCN, whereas exogenous are environmental cues, such as sunlight. So well done, all of you. Looks like most of you got that correct, so well done. All right, last one then. Identify a weakness of the research method that underpins a lot of the topics in biopsych.
Liftoff will start in T-minus 10 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have ignition.
Excellent. So, yeah, Francesca, you said case studies. We've got Bagda said case studies which can't generalise. I'd always be a little bit careful with saying we cannot generalise and say generalise with caution, because by saying we can't generalise, you're invalidating the point that you've previously made. So I would say, must be generalised with caution. We can generalise with caution. With studies like this, yeah, difficult to generalize. Good, that's kind of the common answer that's occurring here. So let's have a reveal. So yeah, unique cases make it hard to generalize to others, and also it's unclear if the brain was healthy before brain damage. That's another thing to think about. Okay, so pass you over to Rosie now for crack the code.
Thank you, Lara. Okay, so we've got a little activity code here. All we need to do is put these in the correct order. So it says there on the screen for explaining the SAM pathway. So on the specification, known as the fight or flight response. So which is the correct order of these letters? Have a read through each of the statements, and then when you think you've got it, put your answer into the chat. So we're looking for the correct order of the letters. Let's go. So a couple of people saying they're not sure what SAM is. Remember, it's a fight or flight response.
Yeah, it's a sympathetic adrenal medullary pathway, if you want to say it in long, but SAM is also fine.
Okay, let's take a look. We've got some correct answers coming through on here. Let's reveal the answers on the screen so you can check how you have done. So the hypothalamus decides a stressor is acute, so it identifies that stressor. B, activating the SAM pathway. The adrenal medulla is activated. This causes adrenaline to be released. This hormone gets the body ready for the fight or flight, and as a result, we get those physiological responses kind of coming through. Okay, so fabulous, right? Let's move on to our next activity, which is confusing pairs, I believe.
Okay, guys, so really just want to know from you whether these key phrases and definitions actually match up. So basically want a correct or incorrect in the chat box. So do these match up correctly? So Daisy, you're saying incorrect. Polly also saying no. Thank you. A lot of people writing down what is SAM, and Mara 643, sympathetic adrenal medulla or medullary system or pathway. Really well done, Amara, for putting that in the chat box. Yeah, incorrect. Yeah, I think all of us are kind of unanimously, I'll say, saying no. Yeah, let's reveal. So it's actually the other way around, and I don't want to talk too much about the difference between EEGs and ERPs right now, because we've got some further questions that are going to distinguish that difference a bit more clearer for you. So let's move on to the second one. So for the second one, we've got post-mortem fMRI, invasive, non-invasive. is this the correct way round or not? So Ben, you're saying no. Yeah, incorrect. A lot of falses coming up. Yeah, really obvious why this is the wrong way round if you know what a post-mortem is, guys. Okay, so well done for recognising that. Excellent. All right, next one then. All right, so do these match up? So we've got our ERPs and EEGs again. I think some of you have already maybe put this answer in the chat box earlier. Yeah. Yeah, excellent. So no, yeah, these are actually the wrong way round, as you've rightly identified, guys. So I think a lot of you in the chat box have actually put in previously the big difference between EEGs and ERPs is ERPs. Yes, they measure brain activity the same way, if you like, EEGs do, but they measure it slightly differently in the sense that they're obviously measuring electrical waves occurring within the first 100 milliseconds after presentation of a stimulus. And obviously those generated after the first 100 milliseconds reflect how the participant reflects and evaluates the stimulus. So yeah, that's ERP, very specific to a stimulus. EEG is a bit more general, okay? Excellent, okay.
Thank
Over
you.
to Rose.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, so on the specification, it states to understand the fight or flight response, including the role of adrenaline. So this next activity is quite simple. You're going to have around 30 seconds to give me 3 roles of adrenaline. Okay, so type your answer in the chat when you're ready. Okay, fabulous. So we've got some lovely answers coming through. I think lots of us have realised that obviously there is overlap between the role of adrenaline and the role of the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system when it's getting the body ready for that fight or flight response. There's a couple of specific actions that it has that I'm not quite sure I've seen anybody saying. Let's take a look at our answers on here, some of which I have seen, some of which I haven't. Oh, Callum Wardle, I think, has just got increased blood flow to brain, so increase oxygen to brain for enable rapid response planning. Excellent knowledge there, Callum. Well done. That was the one that I hadn't particularly seen in the chat just yet. Preparing the body for action or preparing the body for kind of fight or flight, and an increase in blood to brain and skeletal muscles. I also had lots of other things on there as well. So increased heart rate, increased blood flow, increased blood pressure as well. So just be aware, you can be asked about adrenaline on its own. And that top one I would particularly advise is a great one to be aware of. Okay, I'll pass you back to Lara now for some true or false, I believe.
Okay, guys, so topic that some students, I would say, find trickier out of the biopsych topic. So hemispheric lateralization is the idea that 2 halves of the brain are functionally different rather. True or false for this one? Yeah, true. Okay, yeah. Can anyone tell me a function or something that is that has evidence for hemispheric lateralization in the spec that you've probably covered in quite a bit of detail? An area of the brain or a function. Can anybody give me an example? Yeah, NXA24. Left is for language. Really good. Yeah, well done. Excellent. Perfect. Okay, let's look at the next question, which ties in with what we've just spoken about. The right side of the brain is language dominant. True or false? Yeah, I can see a lot of us are kind of discussing the Broca and Vernix area, which is really good. Some of you are saying true, some of you are saying false. So let's have a look at the correct answer here. It is in fact false. A lot of you actually put down it's left side dominant for language, so really well done for recognising that. Okay, let's look at the next one then. Okay, the right side of the brain controls the right side of the body. Is that correct? Yeah, so Georgia Underwood, you're saying false. Emanuela, you're saying false. Yeah, great, excellent, really well done. Yeah, so we just need to remember here with this one, the right side of the brain is control the left side, and vice versa. For the left of the brain is going to control the right side. So yeah, well done. Yeah, I've got some nice key terms coming up there. Contralateral. Yeah, well done. Okay, let's look at the next one. So we've got Sperry's experiment was a quasi experiment. What do we think about that? Tends to be a research method that is maybe not understood fully, clearly. So yeah, we've got a bit of a mixture. I think most of you are saying true though. So let's reveal the answer. So well done those of you that recognise. Move on, I'd like to know from you guys, why is it? What makes it quasi? Can anybody tell me? Yeah, so what have we got here? Existing IV cannot be controlled, Helena Lilly. Well done. God, the answers are going through too fast. Yeah, it's a characteristic of the participant. Yeah, absolutely, which is what makes it a quasi experiment. They all had that characteristic. Yeah, you're all on the right lines. That's really, really encouraging to see. Cool. Perfect. All right, I'll hand you back over to Rosie now for some exam practice.
Thanks, Lara. So this question kind of zooms in on some of the things that we've been talking about. So it's about exogenous Zeitgeber. So let's take a look at this. So Dolly fell asleep during a lecture at college today. Her friend had to nudge her awake as she started to snore. After the lesson, Dolly said she wasn't sleeping at night and that she had got into a bad routine with sleep. So this question is quite similar to a question we've seen before. Using your knowledge of research into exogenous Zeitgebers, briefly explain the advice you would give Dolly to get back into a better sleep routine. So we're thinking about these external factors. Let's see if we can come up with some ideas. Pop your answers into the chat. We'll have a look and see what's starting to come through. So what have we got? Izzy's saying tell her to hide from any light. Giselle's saying she should be in a dark room. Daisy's saying close the curtains. Oh, Kate's saying avoid phone. That's good. Why should we avoid our phone? We know it's going to be a source of light. Is there another reason why we should avoid our phone, I wonder? No light, so the pineal gland can release melatonin. Nice, Georgia. Well done. Okay, so we're mainly kind of mentioning light. Let's see what else we could potentially do on here, because there are other things. Oh, I've got social cues starting to come through actually. Let's have a look at the answer. Let's kind of take a look at what we might be looking for in a question like this. So we definitely got the first kind of mark point on here. So Dolly should make sure that her light is off at bedtime. So shutting curtains, keeping lights off, including turning off her mobile phone. And then what we have to remember as well, if Dolly wants to kind of make sure that her circadian rhythms trained, she needs to make sure that she's getting light during the day as well. So that would be a really good thing to include that I didn't see as many people writing in the chat. And then finally, she could also use social cues. So a couple of us just popped social cues in. But, you know, eating a meal is a social cue to your body that it is being, it's time to be awake, as is being active. And also talking to people, like having conversations with people and that kind of thing as well, indicates to your body, you know, it's not time to sleep. So some nice little things there that you might not have had a think about. Okay, and when it says research, obviously it's referring to the theory of exogenous Zeitgebers. Okay, thank you. I'll pass you back over to Lara.
Okay, great. So this is our last activity before we go through the exam clinic, where you have the opportunity to ask us questions, guys. So we've got, those of you that have come before, you probably know this game. So we've got 4 groups of phrases here, 4 commonalities, if you like, 4 groupings. So I'm going to give you the first one and see if you guys can spot the words here that go with this. So the first one is peripheral nervous system. So can anybody tell me the words, the phrases in the box that are to do with the peripheral nervous system, please? Yeah, good, Darcy. Darcy's saying sympathetic, parasympathetic, somatic, and autonomic. Good, well done. Okay, perfect. So if we reveal that first one, which was the PNS, well done those of you that got that right. The next one is the structure of a cell. Who can give me the answers for the structure of a cell? All right, great. So yeah, it's all coming through now. So we've got axon, dendrites, myelin sheath, cell body. Excellent. Really, really well done, Georgina. Let's have a look at the answers then for that one so you can check it. Yep, axon, cell body, myelin sheath, and dendrites we have for that one. Okay. All right, so the next one is glands. Who can give me the glands that are in this box? What are the glands? And I think someone earlier was asking which glands do you need to know for the exams, and we can obviously answer that in the exam clinic. Yeah, so we've got testes, ovaries, pituitary, and adrenal gland. Yes, really well done if we reveal those answers. So they are all of the glands that we've got on. And can anybody tell me what the last one is referring to? What's the last title of the last 4 white phrases that are on the board there in that box? What's the title of that? What are they? How would we group them? Yeah, ways of studying the brain, polywells. Well done, excellent. So that's our last one there, ways to measure the brain. We're now going to go over and change over to our exam clinic, guys.
Oh, yeah. Just always have to check I'm not on mute because this microphone's got a mind of its own. Right, excellent. That went really fast, didn't it? And you packed a lot in there, some great answers in the chat. We're going to move straight on to your exam clinic. So, you're on your paper 2, which is tomorrow. Is it tomorrow? It is, isn't it? You've got
Tomorrow morning.
your biopsych, you've got research methods, which is a whole section, and then you've also got approaches as well. Some stuff we did on approaches last night. We may refer you to watch last night's live if some of the same questions come up. But ask us anything in the chat. We'll answer as much as we can, and we're going to get going straight away. So I'm going to go to Laura and Rosie. You're going to stick with you.
Yep. So we've got Mianke, Mianke, if you want to find that, Laura. Can you go over the fight or flight, please? So in terms of the theory, okay. So obviously we just had this one of the games, so I'm going to very briefly go through kind of all the steps and the key terms you need to know for each step. So the first thing is, if you want to start right at the beginning, the amygdala is the emotional processing center of the brain. That is what picks up the first kind of signal in terms of distress, and that sends a distress signal to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus recognizes it as acute stress. Acute meaning, it's short term. We need to do it right now, quickly. So it goes down the acute stress route, which is the sympathetic side of the ANS. And you should know that if you know all of your nervous system diagram, okay? So that's the sympathetic side of the ANS, which then activates the adrenal medulla to secrete adrenaline. And then obviously adrenaline has certain roles on our physiological reactions in our body, as we've rightly seen in the last exam clinic and in the last revision blast for biopsych. And obviously you want to give examples of physiological reactions, so increased heart rate, breathing, dilated pupils, etc. There's many. And then after that, and this is sometimes what students miss out, you actually want to explain, and again, this might to a degree depend on the stem or the question, you want to explain that when the stressor has passed, that the parasympathetic side, rest and digest, if you like, kicks in, and therefore our digestive system restarts again, because obviously that is a physiological reaction from adrenaline, and being in fight or flight mode, our digestive system stops. We're not going to be eating a donut when we're in fight or flight mode, hopefully, so we don't need to digest anything in this mode. Mentioning that at the end of your process in terms of the fight or flight response about parasympathetic coming into play is really important. Rosie, you got a question?
Yeah, absolutely. So Lucy Abbott has asked, what is concurrent validity? So if we can find that one and have a look. So a really nice little research methods question there, Lucy. So concurrent validity, if we're looking to establish or to assess the validity of a particular measure, it might be that we have a new measure, like if we've come up with a new questionnaire, for example, we would take our measure and then we would need to find a similar measure, so a similar questionnaire, for example, which is already established for its validity. So that's the phrasing that we're going to be using. We might get our participants, if it is series of questionnaire to complete both, and then we would compare the results on each one of those. And we're not just going to compare them, we're going to correlate them, and then we're going to use an appropriate inferential test to assess the correlation coefficient between them. If the correlation coefficient exceeds positive 0.8 or above, then we can say, hopefully, that our new measure is valid or it has concurrent validity. So I hope that can help you, Lucy, with that question. Lara, shall I pass back over to you?
Yep, sure. So I've got one here by Finn Stewart. What is the easiest way to tell between interval and ordinal data? It's a really good question. Obviously, I know that there was some sort of inferential testing question, something on paper one. So let's just iron this crease out, shall we now? So ordinal and interval data are both, if you like, sort of ranked data. Now, the difference between them, the overall general difference between them, if you like, is one is, I would say, objective and one is subjective. Meaning, ordinal data, and I'm going to give you an example here to illustrate my point. If we were going to do a 100-meter race, and I give this example all the time, and let's say, I don't know, Rosie finishes first on the finish line, I come second, a couple of you come third, fourth, whatever, yeah? The distance between crossing the line first and the person that crossed the line second versus the distance between the person that crossed the line second and third is not the same equidistance. You know, second might have come really close to first, and there might be a really long gap between second and third place. So they're not effective interval measures between each score, right? Whereas interval is, for example, temperature. Really good example. The difference between 1 and 2 Celsius is the same difference between 2 and 3 Celsius. Subjective. Okay, so hopefully that irons that crease out. And I just wanted to really answer Olivia Holden's question, if that's all right, Rosie, because it's a really good question. What is the difference between content and thematic? Again, another area students, I think, maybe sometimes don't feel too confident with. So there are a couple of main differences between content and thematic, Olivia. It is content analysis, obviously, is reducing qualitative data to quantitative data, so to numbers. Now, with thematic, we are reducing data, but we're not converting it to numbers. So what we're doing is we're looking at a report and we are establishing with thematic themes, categories, codes, as we familiarise ourselves with the data, with the script, and we familiarise ourselves with it more, and we might read it again, we might edit our codes and categories a bit more, we might make them a bit more specific. It's an ongoing kind of thing as you're analysing the data. Now, we're not converting it to numbers because what we do under these categories or subheadings when we've analysed our data, we then write a summary underneath each one. So we are still reducing data, we're just not reducing it to numbers. So we're doing a summary, if you like, under each umbrella, if you like, of category code that we've created for thematic. Now that brings me on to my next point, which is a major difference between the two, is content analysis has predetermined categories, and that is a big difference that I want you all to take away, because that's really, really valid and important and significant to the difference of these two. So content analysis has predetermined categories, whereas thematic analysis, they emerge. That's what I said about you familiarise yourself with the data, you read it back over, categories, whatever emerge, we might edit them slightly, refine them as we get more familiar with the data. So they are emerging, whereas content obviously is kind of fixed and determined, if you like. So hopefully that answers your question, Olivia, and anyone else asking about the difference between the two. Over to you, Rosie.
Thank you. So we have got a few people asking the same question now. So we've got Olivia and Lily have both asked how to answer the design a study question, which is good that we're kind of thinking about that. So design a study question, if it is on, right, it's not guaranteed that it's going to be on your paper 2 tomorrow. I know a lot of people are this question. If it is there, generally, it's usually worth somewhere between 10 and 12 marks. Now, the biggest piece of advice that I could give you, look at the bullet points that it is actually asking you for. So usually there are kind of 3 or 4 bullet points that the exam question is asking for. Now, what you don't want to do is just think, all right, it's asked me to design an experiment. I'm going to write down absolutely everything I know about the experiment and include that in my answer. Use the bullet points as subheadings, okay? So if it says, what will the independent variable be? Do yourself a little subheading, underline it, and then write down, a short paragraph underneath that, identifying what the IV and the DV is. Okay, so that would be the first thing. The second thing that I would say, and you're generally told to do this in your answer, is to justify any decisions you make. Now, that word justify just means give a reason for it. So if you've chosen, for example, to use repeated measures design, and you've explained that you're going to include that and you're going to counterbalance it, justify why you've chosen that over independent groups. So you can say, in the context of the study, so apply your knowledge. I've chosen to do this design because there won't be the problem of individual differences that there is for independent groups, because I'm comparing each participant's performance in one condition to their performance in the other condition. Okay, so I think my biggest top tips to you guys would be use the bullet points as your little subheadings. That make sure that you don't miss any as well, miss any information that the exam board are looking for. Justify your decisions throughout, so make sure you explain the reasons and the rationale why. And if it was me, I would have a little look at one tonight, just to make sure you're kind of familiar with that. If you access that via a past paper, that's probably going to be the best thing that you can do, and then check against the mark scheme, what they were looking for on that. Okay, so I hope that helps in terms of a couple of top tips if that does arise.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rosie. So we've got a question from Susa Mogus 56. If we can find that, can you go over synaptic function? Please. Yes, I can. So I don't know, Laura, did you want to go to the slide on synaptic transmission, and I can go through it maybe if that's possible to get up with my voiceover. So obviously there's a lot of key specialist terminology in synaptic transmission. So let's go through this. The first thing that you need to understand is the presynaptic cell. That's where the story starts, and it ends at the postsynaptic cell, if you're right. Okay, so the action potential arrives at the presynaptic node at the end, at the neuron, and that causes the vesicles, and the vesicles is the red little pouches here on the board that you can see that hold the neurotransmitter, and that action potential causes the synaptic vesicles to move and merge with the membrane. And what happens is they empty their chemicals, their neurotransmitters, into a gap called the synaptic gap or synaptic cleft, whatever you want to call it. And so what happens now is you've got this kind of high concentration of neurotransmitters by the presynaptic cell, and we know with diffusion that obviously it goes from a high to a low gradient. So actually these neurotransmitters move towards the postsynaptic membrane cell because there's no neurotransmitters there, let's say, or there's less. And what happens next is they bind with their respective receptor sites. And what do I mean by that? If we've got neurotransmitters such as adrenaline and serotonin, a serotonin neurotransmitter can't bind with an adrenaline receptor, and vice versa. So the neurotransmitters are called, this process is called lock and key. So they find their specific lock, and obviously the neurotransmitter does its work. Now, when I say the neurotransmitter does its work, one of two things can occur here, and this is kind of the next step up. And what happens is either an EPSP or an IPSP. And I'm sure some of you already know what these mean, hopefully all of you. So EPSP is excitatory postsynaptic potential, and IPSP is inhibitory postsynaptic potential. Now, how do you know what one you're going to get? Well, it all depends on the ratio of inhibitory versus excitatory neurotransmitters impacting that postsynaptic membrane. So if you've got more excitatory neurotransmitters impacting that membrane, that postsynaptic membrane, you're more likely to result in an EPSP effect in the synaptic cell, and that's more likely to shoot off another action potential, another message. However, if you've got more inhibitory neurotransmitters there trying to impact the membrane of the postsynaptic cell, you're more likely going to get an IPSP. And what that basically means is it makes it less likely an action potential is going to fire, and it kind of stops and halts there. So the communication doesn't go onward, basically. So I understand, obviously, there's a lot of key specialist terminology here, especially if you're not feeling confident, scientifically, you don't see yourself as biologically minded. This is one of those things that I'm afraid you just have to learn. And I think, personally, the best way to learn it is diagram. Even if you get a question in the exam on it, draw the diagram, you'll get credit for that. but make sure you always complement it with some written description. You know, it's very unlikely, unless it's just asking for a diagram, that you'll get awarded full marks if you just draw a diagram. You'd need to explain that to meet the requirements of the question. So hopefully that answers your question on synaptic transmission function.
Thanks, Lara. So I'm just going to answer a quick question from Sasha Amber, which keeps popping up, which says, what is more likely for the essay? Is it approaches or biopsych? Sasha Amber, I would say there is so much potentiality that you could write about for each one of those sections. I wouldn't even be trying to guess. Okay, so if we're looking at where an essay could be, you know, I would walk into that exam expecting an essay on both areas, so I wouldn't be trying to guess. There's plenty that could be asked on that one. Okay, so just a quick one there. I'm then going to answer Tiana Shish's question. And Laura, I think it would be really nice to use that slide that we've got about the endogenous pacemakers and exogenous zeitgebers essay, because that is what Tiana would like to know. She's asked for the evaluation a couple of times, but I know we've got that as a slide as well. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Laura. So this is quite a common question on the chat tonight, looking at the role of endogenous pacemakers and exogenous zeitgebers, kind of in the control of a biological rhythm. So I suppose with this one, I want you to reassure yourselves, really, because if you've learnt your knowledge for your circadian rhythms, if you've learnt your knowledge for your infradian rhythms, you can actually recycle it in this essay. So at first glance, I think students look at this and think, oh, crikey, this looks really, really tough. You know, it's got those awful words in there. But actually, if we look at it and we kind of walk through how we would do it, well, the first thing we would do in the AO1 is to look and think, right, I'm going to define my endogenous pacemakers and my exogenous zeitgebers. Okay, so first of all, endogenous pacemakers, internal body clocks. And then you're going to use a rhythm to explain their role. So most of you will probably want to use your circadian rhythms in order to do that. So for example, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or the SCN, is going to be involved as your endogenous pacemaker here. So the eyes, first of all, would detect that reduction in light, send that information to the SCN. That would then stimulate the pineal gland to release melatonin. The reticular activating system would be activated and sleep would begin. Okay, so just a couple of sentences on there about your endogenous pacemaker. And then you could go on to talk about your exogenous zeitgeber. Okay, so you could talk about the idea of entrainment. Obviously, these are the things that kind of keep our rhythm in check. We talked about these earlier if you were in the session shortly, just a few minutes ago. We talked about light, we talked about social cues, and that kind of thing. Yeah, AO3, you've then got an awful lot of research and things that you could use. Okay, so we've made a suggestion here on this slide. You don't necessarily have to absolutely stick to this, but this is there to help you. So you could use research to support. So we've got on here research to support your endogenous pacemakers. So we've got Morgan's hamsters on here. I know that I look at DeCourcy's chipmunks with my students on that one. And then we've got also research to support zeitgebers. So we've got Russell's study. That was the one with the pheromones, you know, with the women with the pheromones, with the kind of cotton wool pads, etc. You will have your own study. Even Seif's study could be used in this one, which was the guy in the cave as well. So it's use your research to support pacemakers, zeitgebers. Limitation, they're not really separate. So all these studies that attempt to kind of separate them, really that's not representative of how they operate in day-to-day life, because they are not separate. They continually work together. And then a suggested strength could be, obviously they've got kind of practical applications. So we can use them to prevent things like jet lag by starting to adjust to the time zone that you go into, shift work. So we know that people experience a circadian trough at a certain time. So I guess the main thing to remember is if you've learnt your content for your other areas, circadian, infradian particularly, they can lend themselves really easily to answering what looks like at first glance quite a challenging question. So I hope that helps, Tiana, with your little question on there. And I'll pass back to Lara now. Thank you.
Great. So we've got a question by Neil Ray. How do you answer a choosing a stats test question? Yeah, really easy one actually in terms of like the formula, I would say. This can be anywhere from 4 marks to 7. Hopefully some of you will recognise why it could be 7 marks. So if you got asked on, you know, justifying an appropriate statistical test for a set of data they give you in the STEM, you would get a mark for the actual correct inferential test, a mark for justification 1, and elaboration would be second mark. Again, you would have another justification, which would be the 4th mark, and your elaboration 5th, and then your 3rd justification and elaboration, that would all total to 7. So basically what I'm saying here with answering a stats test, you've got 3 justifications, and on the board you can see they are on the left hand side. What is the level of data? Is it nominal, ordinal, and interval? Now the first question you should be asking yourself is it nominal? Nominal, why? Because it's the most simplistic form of data. It's a tally, it's a frequency, it's categories. So ask yourself that first, because then you can cross that off. You know it's not the sine or chi-square. You know it's going to be out of ordinal interval. Now, ordinal and interval can be difficult to distinguish between sometimes in the exam, but don't forget what I said before. You know, ordinal is about subjective ranking, whereas interval is more objective, okay? And there are lots of examples of ordinal and interval data on the internet, on psychology websites and on our website. So, yeah, make sure you know the difference between those two. The second justification is it a test of difference or a test of association, or another word for that would be correlation or relationship. And usually in the STEM, I've noticed, and I'm sure some of you have as well, that they often give away that they're testing for a relationship. They'll put relationship in the STEM. So you know already, okay, one of my justifications is done. It's a relationship. Then our third justification is our design. And when we're talking about design, we're talking about how we've designed where our participants are going in the study, in our conditions. So we've got repeated measures or unrelated, which is independent. Okay, so related or unrelated design. And then obviously, hopefully, you'll all come to the correct inferential test, because you would have hopefully memorised this box by the exam. Okay, so that hopefully that answers your question. I think just be mindful that whatever way you look at it, justifications, and obviously there's a STEM, because there will be. Just make sure that you link your kind of area of justification. Like, okay, I think this is nominal data. Let's say you think it's chi-square. I think this is nominal data. You need to actually say how it's nominal data in the actual STEM. So pick out the bit that you recognise as nominal data and quote it there. And that's kind of your thorough justification in terms of in this study, which often they like to put at the end of questions, as we know, or in this observation, or in the above. So yeah, just make sure you link to the STEM is the big answer there. And then we've got Sadia Alom. Is it possible we could be asked to write an essay for psychosexual stages? It's really unlikely, I'm going to say. It's unlikely that they're going to ask you on a really specific facet of Freud's theory. And I think that the thing to remember is, if you find there is enough information, and this goes with most questions, if you find there's enough information in the textbook to write a 16 marker on it, then I'm going to push the boat out here and say they could ask it. But psychosexual stages is one part of a big theory. So it's actually way more likely to ask a general question on the psychodynamic theory, Freud's psychodynamic theory, rather than a part of it. So I hope that rest you assured and yeah, makes that a bit clearer for you.
Yeah, I think it does, Lara. I think I'm sort of prompted by what you're saying, by some of those questions that have come up more recently, where it's kind of said, oh, evaluate the psychosexual stages or something like that. And just to mention, it just kind of popped up into my head then. Obviously, you use the general evaluation of the approach. So, you know, if it did come up, it would certainly not be a 16 marker, but as an 8 marker, you could easily have 3 marks worth of knowledge on that. And then obviously use your general evaluation of the approach. Because I think, was it last year we had a question on discuss self-actualization or conditions of worth or something in the humanistic approach? That's it. And that was an 8 marker. And your evaluation for that, lots of students came out and went, well, I've not been taught specific evaluation for those areas, but they did know the evaluation for humanism. So sometimes, often, in fact, in the exam, it's about kind of thinking on your feet and sort of tailoring what you know to evaluate the question that's there. I've got a question from Connie Dyer, who's asked a couple of times, can you explain Rogers and congruence and all that relates to it, please? It's not come up in 6 years. So I think it has sort of come up in a couple of little questions, Connie. I don't know, Connie, if you've seen that question on Tatiana. I don't know if you've seen the 16 marker on Tatiana. Congruence is certainly mentioned in that one, so maybe have a look. I think it's 2017 off the top of my head, but you'll have to have a little look into that one. But certainly we can talk to you a little bit about congruence this evening. happening, that's not a problem at all. So congruence is the idea when there's kind of a match or a consistency between your perceived self, so how you kind of view yourself, and your ideal self and the person that you want to be. And if you have congruence, that enables you to show personal growth and to achieve your goals. The other thing to know about congruence is if there's a mismatch between the person you perceive yourself to be and the ideal person you would like to be, this puts us into a state of incongruence where you're more likely to have kind of low self-worth, poorer psychological health, for example. And it's at that point that congruence then really ties in to person-centered therapy. So Rogers would say that somebody should go to counselling either to develop a more healthy view of themselves as they are, or to develop a more realistic or achievable ideal self. So I think that's kind of what I'd be looking for, certainly if kind of a short answer came up on that, Connie, and I hope with your question.
Great. Okay, so we've got a question from Rosie. When to accept or reject the null or experimental hypotheses? Yeah, really good question, Rosie. So you're going to be accepting, okay, let's just get clear on the different terms that could be used for experimental. We've got experimental hypothesis and alternate hypothesis interchangeably. You can use either or. So if you've heard alternate hypotheses, the same as experimental. Now, you're going to accept the experimental hypotheses if the result that you've looked at with the critical value table is significant. You're saying something's occurring. Yeah. If your result that you've looked up is not significant, you'll be accepting the null because nothing's occurring. It's not significant. That's just a really simple way of explaining it. So I hope that helps you out, and if you're thinking, where would I be using that? You'd be using it if they asked you to explain whether these findings are significant or not, and maybe it'd be worth like 4 marks. You'd have to explain why that is, and therefore what hypotheses you would be accepting. Okay. We've also got Rebecca Short. Do you need to know the order of referencing for a report? Yes. they are. So these are the types of questions that can be asked in referencing. The purpose of. You need to know the purpose of referencing. Okay. You need to know how to reference. Now, they're not going to be as mean as they are, let's say, when I was at uni with referencing in terms of commas, italics, dots, blah, blah, blah. However, you are expected to know the order of, like, okay, it goes the name first, then the year, and then it's the title. So the two that I would say to go for to learn, if you're going to learn a referencing formula, it would be to reference a book and to reference a journal article. They're the two that I would learn to do. And if you're sitting there thinking, I have no idea even how to do that or where to look for it, in some textbooks you'll find it. But if not, if you Google Harvard referencing system and make sure you're clicking on a website that is an organizational, educational at the end, then that will give you the Bible of Harvard referencing. It'll be the same for every center. Okay, so if you did want to look that up last minute, that if you're going to kind of shortcut it in a way, I would just memorize how to memorize a book and how to memorize a journal article.
Absolutely, yeah, good advice, definitely. We've got a quick question from Jasmine, who's asked, could year one research methods come up? So yes, Jasmine, I know it can be quite confusing sometimes if you're in a centre where there's like the AS and the A level, but yeah, absolutely. So everything that you've learnt for research methods could come up on paper 2. Okay, and obviously research methods is worth kind of 48 marks on this paper. Okay, so please do make sure that you have a look at that. And then I think we've also had a question about where to find the critical value, but I can't find it now, Laura, which is somewhat ironic, seeing as I can't find the question about the critical value that wants to know how you find the critical value. Oh, excellent. All right, it's Tiana. Hello again, Tiana. I didn't realise it was you that had asked that. Okay, so how do you work out the critical value? So, Laura, you've read my mind. So we've got a little example on here for you all to kind of have a look at if you're worried about finding the critical value when you are doing a stats test. So let's take a look at this, and it kind of gives us a good little bit of practice for tomorrow. So we've got a psychologist conducted an observational study to test the hypothesis males will be more likely to walk under a ladder than females. At the end of a study, she analysed the data using a chi-square test and obtained a calculated value of 2.981. So we've got in the question, we've referenced to the critical values in table 1, and that's what Tiana's question was about, where DF equals 1. Explain whether or not the calculated value of chi-square is significant at the 5% level. So the question is, how do we find this critical value from here? Okay, so I'm going to talk you through some steps. The first thing you need to look at, you can see in the table, it says level of significance for a one-tailed test, level of significance for a two-tailed test. So we need to look at the hypothesis. So you might have had to write a hypothesis. In this instance, we've been given a hypothesis. Males will be more likely to walk under a ladder than females. So in this instance, we know that this is a one-tailed or directional hypothesis. Then next, we need to find the level of significance. So in this question, it tells us it is 5%. If ever it doesn't tell you, then you should assume that it is 5%. A 5% significance level strikes a balance between making a type 1 and type 2 error. So that is the one that we are going to use. So if you just follow that down on the table, I know it's hard when you can't see kind of where I'm pointing, but we're on one-tailed test, 0.05, and then we're going to go down on there, and we're told in the question that DF equals 1. So we can see with DF equals 1, a one-tailed test and a 5% level of significance, that our critical value is 2.71. Now, once we've found that, we then read the rule underneath the table. So underneath the table, and that is always going to be there. We've been asked this before, do you have to memorize the rule for each test? No. So the information is under the table. The calculated or observed value, which remember they gave us in the question, 2.981, has to be greater than or equal to the critical value, which we just found is 2.71 for significance to be shown. Okay, so if we bring up our little answer on the next slide, there's all the information that we've kind of worked our way through. So in other words, that is saying 2.981 must be equal to or greater than 2.71. Good little top tip, if you include the numbers underneath the table, so next to where it says the calculated value, write down 2.981, and then you can read it out to yourself, and it makes less chance that you're going to make a little error then. So it is significant, and it's at that point we'd say, we will accept our alternate hypothesis and reject our null hypothesis. Okay, so work your way through it. If it's worth more than 2 marks, the extra marks are just for saying how you found the critical value. So literally tell the examiner the steps that you've gone through in order to find that critical value. Okay, I hope that answers your question and was useful for everybody else in the chat as well. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got a question by Humna Mahmood. Could you go through sections of a scientific report and potential questions on this, please? That's quite a lot to cover, but in short, unlikely they're not going to ask you about the introduction. They will ask you about the abstract. Mostly, I would say, about the purpose. I can't see that they've never asked to write one, have they? I don't think.
No, they haven't. No.
And that'd be really difficult as well without all the relevant information, unless they give you a whole book of information, which they're not going to do for the exam. So, purpose of an abstract, which, just to remind you, is a shop window. It is the first thing the reader reads before they decide they're going to read the whole report, and it is the last thing the author, or if you like, the researcher, writes, because it's after they've completed the whole study. You definitely will get asked on any parts of method section. That could be small questions in the research methods or in other topics. It could be part of a study, like writing a method section out. You definitely get asked on results, interpreting results, stats, discussion, as in how to write up whether something's significant or not, and then also referencing. You could get asked to reference or the purpose. You could also get asked to write the 3 forms, which are, to remind you, consent form, standardized instructions, and the debrief form. So that's kind of all the potentials, if you like, in areas for scientific report. Chow Ming Wing, we've got, why do some studies use 1% significance level and not 5%? We might use 1%, so if we want to be a bit more stringent, if we need to be a bit more sure. So for example, drug testing in the medical world, that's when we might use a more stringent level of significance. But just to keep everyone clear and thinking, oh, what one do I have to use in the exam? Always use 0.05. Yeah, the percent level, unless the STEM and the examiner has asked you to use a different level, you always use 0.05. Okay. Yeah. There was another really good question. Yeah, so we've got Meisha. This has been asked a few times. How do you know when to bring the HPA axis into your answer? What would the question ask? HPA is not on your specification, and I just want to clear that up. The HPA axis is to do with chronic stress. That was in the old spec many years ago. So it's not specifically in this new spec, chronic stress. Okay, we're just looking at acute stress, which is fight or flight. So if you have learnt that, you can let your brain forget that now for tomorrow if you're AQA exam board.
Okay, I've got a couple of quick questions as well. So Sai has asked us about what a paradigm is. So paradigm and paradigm shifts on there. So Sai, I would say to you, a paradigm, I always think of two things when we think of a paradigm. We are looking for the options and the methods that are being used to understand and explain behavior and to study behavior. Okay, so if we think about an approach like the behaviorist approach, we could say that their assumptions are things like, we are born with the blank slate, we learn our behavior from the environment, and our methods would be focusing on things like lab experiments and maybe use of animals. Okay, so that would be their paradigm. A paradigm shift occurs when kind of new or contradictory evidence is presented that results in a change to those assumptions and methods. So the way in which we explain behavior through the assumptions, or the way in which we understand behavior through the assumptions, changes, and the way in which we study behavior changes. Now, usually, Si, when this has come up in the past, it's worth having a look at a couple of little past exam questions. It has been to apply your knowledge to a STEM, to a scenario where the paradigm shift has taken place, and you can say, you know what, it's moved from this to this. Okay, so have a look at some little examples. But certainly a paradigm shift would come under that. So assumptions, methods changing due to that new or contradictory evidence. And then just really quickly, we had Jasmine asking about a consent form, and I've seen that come up for a couple of others as well. So I'll just quickly give you a couple of top tips on a consent form. So if you do get asked to write a consent form, then we're looking for a few things. Ordinarily, you would be writing the consent form yourself for kind of somewhere between a 4 and 6 mark question. Now, if you are writing the consent form, it should be written verbatim. What does that mean? It's written as if you are kind of talking to the participant or writing them a letter. So I would always recommend that you start it off as, dear participant, thank them for taking part in the study. Thank them for considering taking part in the study, because obviously a consent form is before. And then tell them the general aim of the study that you are conducting. Remind them of ethical things, okay? So tell them that their data will remain confidential, obviously, to anybody outside of the study. Tell them that they have the right to withdraw at any time. And then a really good thing is to do a little thing at the bottom to say signed, and a little line for them to sign it, and date, and a little place for them to put the date, just so it looks like, it feels quite strange when you write the question, but you'll see on the mark schemes and things like that, that is what we're expecting in terms of how it is written. Okay, so 3-4 little things there that are hopefully some top tips for you to have a look at.
Okay, I'll take it over to Laura now, because I don't know how she wants to wrap up the exam clinic. If there were any common things that we got to mention or answer, or anything you want us to go over.
Yeah, that was brilliant. Just let me catch up one sec. I think what's a great way to end is to just some quick fire questions. I know you've answered loads of questions tonight, but I've just made a note of a couple that keep coming up. Any questions that we haven't managed to address, because there's been almost 1,000 of you here tonight, so anything that we haven't answered, I've made a note of, and we will address it on Instagram tonight at Tutor2U Psych. As you have all week, you can still get in touch with us and ask questions on our feeds, or as a direct message. That's fine. So here to end our live stream are some quick fire questions, and that's a challenge for you too, because some of these aren't quick things, so we want quick answers. Let's start with you, Rosie, for type 1 and type 2 errors.
Yeah, sure. So, type 1 error is often called a false positive. So, that's when we think we have a significant difference, but really it's been caused by chance. A type 2 error is a false negative. So, that's when we think we haven't found significant results when really we have. That's a very short answer.
Fab. I'll do this one. Do we need to know AO3 for fight or flight? It's asked a lot this time. You'll never get a straight answer off any exam board, but for Tutor to You, we always say yes. And
Yeah.
there is quite a bit that you can use. So you can talk about gender differences. You've got oxytocin, which makes females respond differently. Females have evolved to respond with the tend and befriend. What is it? I can't
Tend
speak.
and befriend. Yeah.
Tend
Yeah. Yeah.
and befriend response. You can also use your approaches and research methods knowledge. You've got the idea that research into fight or flight is objective, it's compatible with science. There's not just fight or flight, there's freeze. So actually, there's quite a few things. Nothing that's going to need loads of revision because it's mostly stuff that you already know. Anyway, okay. What about this one, Laura? Difference between the rhythms.
Oh Christ. Okay, so yeah, your three rhythms that you've got there. Circadian, I'm sure you all know as our 24-hour rhythm. Okay. Our infraradium, I'm having to remind myself of this, is more than 24 hours, and obviously our ultraradium is less than 24 hours. So think of circadian as like pig in the middle. That's the 24. Okay, and then you can think of ultraradium as less, and then infraradium as more. Hopefully that simplifies it in your mind.
Yeah. I always get confused, sympathise with students when it says more than 24 hours, less than 24 hours, because that messes with my brain completely.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
just
Same.
remember circadian 24 hours, infradian normally like monthly or yearly, isn't it?
Maybe
So,
we need to make something up, an easy thing to like
yeah.
arrive to remember the difference here. I don't know.
And
ICU, like the acronym ICU, if you write that kind of going downwards, that's them in order of length. But I infradian longest C U like that.
Oh, that's
So that
good.
that works. Yeah, that works. Yeah.
Okay. Can one be a 16 marker? Again, there's no clear no on this. However, not likely. We've seen it as an 8 marker before.
Yeah.
And a few people have asked, well, what would we put if that happens? So for one, you just talk about is assumptions, introspection, the research that you did, and then for evaluation, you can talk about the move from philosophy to science. That's what he's credited for. You can even bring in the behaviourist approach and say why they didn't like one's paradigm and why they shifted it to focus on what was observable. You can talk about the idea that they were trained in introspection. However, that's still not perfect. You're still getting subjective information of participants. So there's enough for 8 marks. I doubt that. No, I mean, I would say no for the 16 marker, but you never know. Except we do know, don't we? It's not going to be 16 marker. Okay, quick one for you, Rosie. Localised versus lateralised.
Okay, so hemispheric localization refers to the idea that different areas of the cerebral cortex are kind of specialized for different functions. For example, the visual cortex is responsible for vision, and that's kind of found in both hemispheres. So localization refers to that. So different areas being specialized for different things, Wernicke's, Broca's, motor, etc. Lateralized refers to the idea that the different hemispheres are specialized for different functions, e.g. left language.
Fab, well done. Evaluations for endocrine system, don't need it. Someone else has said, what do we need to know? You just need to know for a mark or two that the endocrine system is your system of glands that passes all your hormones around, regulates your hormones. And then you already know the adrenal gland, but just make sure you've got one or two other glands in there. You've got your thymus gland, you've got your testes, your ovaries, your pineal gland you already know from sleep, why not use that? So there's no evaluation, that won't be an essay. Could be an application, but generally it's an AO1 question now. Can you still get research methods in other sections, or will it only be in research methods? It'll definitely be in the research methods section, obviously, but they can literally put it wherever they like. So, yeah, they can go anywhere you want. What about this one, Laura? Do you have to include psychosexual stages?
Yeah, good question. So if it's, again, if you've got a topic that is 16 marker question just on psychodynamic approach, I would say that you want to give a nice universal overview of the approach itself. So I would make sure I'm mentioning the tripartite personality theory, the psychosexual stages and defense mechanisms. How much detail I go into on those is my selective choice and what I want to communicate to the examiner. But I would give an overview and make sure that I mention most facets of his theory.
Yeah, just the tip that we all agree on there is everyone's comfy talking about Freud. Don't spend so long. Don't get run out of time and think, oh flip, I've done loads of AO1, because you're capped, aren't you, for AO1? Get into your evaluation as soon as you can. Okay, one for you, Rosie. Can you give us a brief outline of skews?
Yep, no problem. So when we're looking at skewed data, obviously there's a few things you need to be able to do. That is to recognize the type of skew from the figures that they give you. So they will give you a mean, a median, and a mode, and you will be looking at that to work out if it's positive or negative. That's the first one, and I'll explain how you do that in a minute. The second type of question is to sketch a skew. So you may be asked to sketch a negative skewed distribution or a positive skewed distribution. And don't forget as well, I will talk about these in a minute, but there's also a normal distribution as well. So a normal distribution set of data, your mode, your median, and your mean occupy a similar midpoint, which means they are all roughly the same. If it is a negative skew, your mode will be higher than the other two figures, the median and the mean. If it's a negative skew, your mode will be higher. If it's a positive skew, your mode will be lower compared to the others. That's how you tell. Really, really simple, quick way to tell. Take a look at the mode, compare it to the median and the mean, and that's how you tell the difference, basically. For your shapes, you go on Google Images and just type in positive, negative skew, you'll be able to see the shape of those distribution curves. And you need to be able to sketch it. That just means roughly show the shape that it would be. Y-axis is frequency, X-axis is the score or whatever you're looking into.
Great, and we'll try and post a few images of them later on. Quick question here. What part do you use disruption of biological rhythms? It's not named on your specs, so you won't be asked questions on it. However, knowing things that can disrupt your rhythms will help you answer some AO2 questions like we saw tonight. So that's where that could come in handy. One for you, Laura. How's a humanistic approach holistic?
Yeah, it's holistic because it's looking at the unique individual and all their parts that make up the whole sum, rather than viewing behavior or their behavior as a result of their chemistry, their neurochemicals, for example. So it's trying to actually look at the whole human with all the different facets to it, basically, that might influence their behavior. So that could be things like our upbringing, our parental upbringing, any gang membership, things like that, and circles of groups. It could be our teachers, role models, older siblings, things like that. So that can all impact, as well as thinking about things like our own directive learning as well, and a concept that we have in the humanistic approach of free will.
Fantastic, well done. Great stuff there. So just a couple of reminders then. You've got your exam tomorrow. We're going to be back on Tuesday the 28th with issues and debates, and then the following night, Wednesday the 29th, with our paper 3 clinic, and then that'll be it for this year. So it's going quick. Remember, we've gone through loads tonight. You can watch it back. You can play all these questions back, but we've got 2 halves tonight, biopsych and then the clinic. You can go back and watch all the others. Focus on what you don't want to come up. Don't just stay where you're comfy. Challenge yourself. You've still got a good few hours tonight to go over some of those key questions and areas. From us, thank you very much. Give us a like if you found this useful. That'll just help it get to other people who might not have been able to join us tonight. And we will see you next week. Thank you, Rosie and Laura.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.
Good luck, everyone.
Bye, everybody.